Asterisk. The dull murmur of the airport terminal was pierced by a sharp, sickening crack, the unmistakable sound of a body striking polished tile. Gasps rose, a woman screamed, and a child began to wail. Near the front of the TSA security line, a young Marine in crisp green service uniform crumpled to the ground. He lay still, his chest fluttering with shallow, uneven breaths, his face pale against the cold floor. Panic surged through the crowd. Travelers instinctively backed away, torn between fear and morbid curiosity, while the glow of phones lit up as onlookers began recording. "Nobody move," barked a TSA agent, his voice teetering between command and panic. "Clear the area." The order only heightened the sense of alarm. Among the crowd was Douglas Nichols, 83 years old, stooped beneath the weight of years, but with eyes still sharp beneath their haze of age. Dressed in a worn tweed jacket, he had been shuffling forward, simply hoping to catch his flight to visit his granddaughter. But the moment the Marine fell, something awakened deep inside him, an old, familiar thrum in his chest. Trouble. His gaze locked on the young man's twisted body. The faint blue tinge around his lips, the sheen of sweat forming on his brow. He recognized the signs instantly. Shock, hypoxia, the body shutting down. He stepped forward with deliberate calm, his every motion purposeful. "Hey, old man, where do you think you're going?" The sharp voice belonged to Miller, a young TSA supervisor in a navy blue uniform, chest puffed with authority. He thrust an arm out, blocking Douglas's path. "Nobody moves. This is a security incident." Douglas didn't look at him. His gravelly voice carried a quiet weight. "He needs help." "I'm a medic." Miller scoffed, his lip curling in contempt. "Yeah, sure. Everyone's a doctor in an emergency. Step back before I have you removed. We have professionals on the way." The crowd held its breath. Some stared at the Marine's trembling hand pressed against his abdomen, others at the frail old man defying the young officer. Douglas moved forward anyway, slow, steady, unstoppable. Miller's face flushed, his authority crumbling in front of hundreds of eyes. He stepped closer, hissing into Douglas's face. "This is a federal checkpoint. My authority here is absolute. Touch him, and I'll throw you in a cell. Do you understand me, Grandpa?" Finally, Douglas's gaze lifted to meet his. His voice was steady, stripped of emotion. "These hands have set bones in rice paddies and stitched arteries in helicopters. They know what they're doing now. So you decide, are you going to let me help this boy? Or are you going to stand there and watch him die while you wait for your professionals?" The bluntness struck Miller silent, just for a beat. In that pause, Douglas sidestepped him and knelt beside the fallen Marine. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. He touched two fingers to the young man's neck, locating a thready, racing pulse. With practiced movements, he tilted Riley's head back, opening his airway, easing his breathing. "Son, can you hear me?" His voice softened. The Marine's eyelids fluttered open, clouded with pain. "Corporal Riley," he whispered, barely audible. "Leg, my leg." Douglas's eyes swept downward, noting the brace hidden under green trousers, the clenched hand over the stomach. His chest tightened. This wasn't just a leg injury. Something inside was failing, all around them. The crowd stared in silence, phones still raised. But hearts pulled toward the quiet defiance of an old man refusing to stand idle. Asterisk. Douglas's knees ached against the unforgiving tile, but he hardly noticed. His hands moved with an instinct carved over decades, as though time itself had folded and carried him back into the chaos of another place. He pressed two fingers gently at the Marine's neck, still a pulse, fast but fragile. The young man's abdomen twitched beneath his hand. Pain etched across his pale face. "Stay with me, son," Douglas murmured, voice rough but steady. "You're going to be fine." He loosened Riley's collar and adjusted his airway, listening to the shallow rasp of his breathing. Then his eyes darted around. No equipment, no sterile field, nothing he once relied on. Only what people carried in their bags. His hand pressed to the floor for balance, and the chill of the tile sparked something buried deep inside his memory. For an instant, the bright fluorescent lights of the terminal dissolved. He was young again, crouched in a mud-soaked field under the furious thunder of rotor blades. A helicopter's searchlight burned through smoke and rain. Screams mixed with gunfire. Beside him lay another soldier, younger even than Riley, blood pouring from his side. Douglas's younger hands, steady even under fire, tore fabric into bandages, fingers slick with mud and crimson. He had worked then as he worked now, not thinking, not questioning. Only acting. The vision snapped back to present. And the airport terminal returned, the crowd holding its breath, Miller fidgeting angrily behind him. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint odor of burned coffee from a nearby kiosk. Step away now. Miller barked again, louder, desperate to reclaim control. His hand hovered near the radio on his shoulder. Medical is en route. You have no authority here. Douglas ignored him. His voice was a quiet command meant only for Riley. Breathe, Marine. In through your nose, slow. He pressed Riley's hand gently aside and inspected the hidden brace on his leg. The fabric beneath was damp. Internal bleeding. God damn it, Douglas muttered under his breath. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, old, worn, but clean enough, and applied firm pressure to Riley's abdomen. The young man grimaced, a faint moan escaping his lips. The crowd leaned in, phones capturing every twitch of the scene. A businessman lowered his phone, guilt flickering in his eyes as he saw the determination etched on the old man's face. Someone whispered, "He knows what he's doing." Miller took a step closer, his voice dropping to a threat. "One more move and I'll have you restrained. You hear me, old man? You'll spend the night in a holding cell for obstruction." Douglas didn't even glance at him. His voice rose, firm but not loud. "This boy has minutes. If you want to arrest me, you can do it after I save him." The words cut through the terminal like a blade. Silence followed. Even Miller, jaw clenched tight, froze under the weight of them. Douglas shifted, sliding his hand beneath Riley's back to prop him slightly, easing the pressure on his lungs. His movements were slow but deliberate, each gesture steeped in decades of muscle memory. He felt the Marine's breath, steady, still weak, but less chaotic. Then Riley's lips moved again, whispering through the haze of pain. "Corpsman. You a corpsman?" Douglas's throat tightened. His hands didn't falter, but his voice softened. "Once upon a time." And for a fleeting second, the old battlefield echoed in his ears, the call for medics, the cries of boys who never made it home. The relentless duty of patching wounds that sometimes couldn't be saved. He blinked the memory away and focused on the here and now. This boy, this life, still had a chance. The sharp squeal of wheels against tile broke the silence, an emergency medical cart being pushed at full speed. Two paramedics in navy scrubs and bright orange vests burst into the checkpoint area, their expressions taut with urgency. The crowd parted instantly, relief flooding through whispers. Finally, the professionals are here. Douglas didn't look up. His hands stayed pressed against Riley's abdomen, steady and sure. He had counted the boy's breaths, felt the shallow rise and fall of his chest. If the pressure left too soon, he knew what would happen. Miller seized the moment. His chest swelled with authority as he turned to the crowd and barked, "Step back! Medical team is here. Everyone stay clear." He shot a glare at Douglas. "All right, old man, your show's over. Hands off, now." The younger of the two medics knelt opposite Douglas, medical bag already unzipped. He froze at the sight of the tweed-clad elder's grip on the Marine's abdomen. For a split second, recognition flickered in his eyes. Not of the man, but of the method. The pressure point was perfect. "Sir," the medic said cautiously, We've got it from here. Douglas met his gaze, voice calm but edged with steel. If you pull my hand off, you'll lose him before you can get your clamps ready. He's bleeding inside. Pressure stays until you're prepped. The medic hesitated. His partner, older and clearly in charge, leaned in. Vitals? He asked quickly, pulse fast, thready. Breathing shallow. Shock setting in. Douglas's tone was crisp, clinical, unshaken. Lower abdomen swelling. Internal bleed. Stabilize airway. 4 fluids. But don't you dare lift pressure until he's strapped and loaded. Both medics exchanged a look. The older one nodded, signaling his agreement. He's right. Leave it. Miller's face flushed crimson. Excuse me? I gave the order. He's a civilian. The medic cut him off, sharp and professional. With respect, sir, the civilian just bought us precious time. His voice lowered, reverent almost. And he's no amateur. The crowd erupted in murmurs, phones capturing every second. Some people even clapped softly, a ripple of defiance against Miller's authority. Douglas barely noticed. He adjusted his position, easing Riley's airway, speaking softly to keep the Marine conscious. Stay with me, Corporal. You're tougher than this. Eyes open, just like on the field. Riley's eyelids fluttered, a weak nod affirming he heard. For a heartbeat, the airport terminal wasn't just steel beams and sterile lights. It was a battlefield triage zone. The crowd transformed into silent witnesses of something raw and timeless. One man's refusal to let another slip away. Miller, shaking with rage, finally snapped. He grabbed Douglas's shoulder, ready to yank him back. But the lead medic barked, "Don't touch him. He's the only thing holding this Marine together." The words rang out, final and undeniable. Miller's hand hung in the air, trembling. And for the first time, his authority crumbled in front of hundreds of eyes. Douglas didn't gloat, didn't even look at him. His focus never left the boy beneath his hands. His gravelly whisper carried a weight older than the walls of the airport. Breathe, Marine. Just breathe. We're not done yet. The paramedics moved swiftly now, confidence restored by Douglas's intervention. One slid an oxygen mask over Riley's face, while the other prepared the stretcher. The hiss of the tank filled the air, a sharp counterpoint to the hush that still gripped the terminal. Every eye watched, but no one dared move closer. Douglas's knees trembled as he slowly shifted his weight, the ache of age finally catching up to him. For nearly 10 minutes he had been a pillar of calm, holding the young Marine's life between his hands. Now, as the medic secured Riley with practiced efficiency, he carefully lifted his palm away from the boy's abdomen, fingers stiff with fatigue. A faint stain of blood darkened the old cotton handkerchief, crumpled but resolute in his grasp. Pressure's stable, the lead medic confirmed, nodding to Douglas. His voice carried quiet respect. You did good, sir. Douglas gave a slight shake of his head, his voice low. Not good. Just necessary. The medics lifted Riley onto the stretcher. His eyes fluttered, just enough to catch Douglas's face as they rolled him away. With oxygen easing his breaths, his lips formed a single word, thanks. Before fading again into the haze of pain, the sound pierced Douglas's chest deeper than any praise could. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself against the weight of years and memory. Behind him, Miller stood rigid, face mottled red with humiliation. His authority had collapsed under the undeniable clarity of truth. An old man had done what he could not, and everyone had seen it. 100 phones captured not just the moment, but his failure. The crowd shifted. Whispers became words, words became applause. Not loud, not celebratory, but solemn in acknowledgement. Travelers, businessmen, parents with children, even TSA officers who had stayed silent before they clapped, eyes fixed on Douglas. Some nodded with quiet gratitude, others simply stood in awe. Douglas straightened slowly, his frame frail but unbowed. He tucked the blood-stained handkerchief into his pocket, adjusted the sleeve of his worn tweed jacket, and finally looked at the crowd. His expression held no triumph, only a weary gravity. "Don't thank me," he said softly, almost to himself. "Thank the boy for wearing the uniform." For a long, breathless moment, the terminal remained silent but for the fading squeak of stretcher wheels. Miller's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. His hands balled into fists at his side, useless now. Douglas stepped past him without a glance, as though the man no longer existed. The old veteran's stride was slow, deliberate. Each step echoed louder than the clapping, louder than the whispers, louder even than the grief that pressed against his chest. He carried no medals, no rank, no authority, only the weight of a lifetime spent answering calls like this one. And for the first time in years, as he walked toward the boarding gates, strangers looked at him not as an old man shuffling through the world, but as something else entirely. A medic, a soldier, a guardian who refused to let the next generation fall while he still drew breath. The boarding gate was quieter than the checkpoint, but Douglas barely noticed the murmur of announcements and the shuffle of passengers around him. He sat hunched in a plastic chair, hands folded loosely over the blood-stained handkerchief in his lap. His chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths, the rhythm of a man forcing himself to stay present, but his mind was already slipping. Everywhere he looked, the terminal blurred. The squeak of rolling luggage became the grind of helicopter rotors. The chatter of travelers turned into distant shouts over gunfire. He blinked, and suddenly the rows of seats became stretchers, lined with boys far too young to be dying. Their faces came back to him, one after another. Martinez, who joked about home right up until the bullet found him. Carter, who sang under his breath to steady his nerves as Douglas packed gauze into a wound too deep to stop. And Johnson, who grabbed his hand as the life drained out of him, whispering the same word Riley had just spoken. "Thanks." Douglas squeezed his eyes shut, but the faces didn't leave. They hovered in the sterile light of the airport, ghosts crowding the empty seats beside him. His shoulders sagged under the weight of memory. For decades he had told himself he had done his duty, that he had saved as many as he could. But moments like this reopened the ledger, and all he saw were the names of the boys he couldn't bring home. He rubbed his thumb absently over the handkerchief, as though its fresh stain connected him to every life that had slipped through his fingers. A child's laughter broke the trance. He opened his eyes and saw a little girl tugging at her mother's sleeve, pointing toward him. The mother hushed her gently, leading her away, but not before Douglas caught the girl's wide-eyed stare. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity, innocence trying to understand the gravity etched into the face of an old stranger. Douglas leaned back in his seat, the plastic creaking beneath him. The announcements droned. Flight 227 now boarding. He was supposed to be on that flight, supposed to be headed toward the simple joy of seeing his granddaughter. Instead, he sat heavy with the knowledge that the war he thought he had left half a century ago had followed him into a modern airport terminal. His hand drifted to the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out an old, worn photograph, creased and faded from decades of travel. It showed a younger version of himself, arms around 3 grinning Marines, mud streaking their uniforms, exhaustion hidden behind smiles. He traced their faces with a finger: Martinez, Carter, Johnson. The ache in his chest deepened, but he didn't look away. For the first time in years, he whispered aloud to them, "I still hear you, boys. I always will." A tear threatened at the corner of his eye, but he blinked it back. He wouldn't break here, not in front of strangers, not when Riley still fought for his life a few floors below. Douglas tucked the photo away, folded the handkerchief, and straightened in his seat. To everyone else, he looked like nothing more than an old man waiting for a flight. But inside, the battlefield still burned, and the faces of the fallen still walked with him. Douglas moved slowly down the jet bridge, his cane tapping against the metal floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the ghosts he had just spoken to at the gate were following him onto the plane. He kept his head low, his eyes fixed on the boarding pass crumpled in his hand. All he wanted was to sink into his seat and disappear into the background. The flight attendant at the door offered him a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, sir." Douglas nodded silently, shuffling past her. The narrow aisle stretched ahead, lined with passengers stowing luggage and adjusting seatbelts. Conversations buzzed, overhead bins slammed, and for a moment he thought he might slip through unnoticed until a young man in the aisle seat looked up. His eyes widened, recognition sparking. "That's him," the man whispered, nudging his companion. "That's the guy. The veteran from the checkpoint." Douglas froze. He didn't want this. Not here, but it was too late. Word spread like wildfire through the cramped cabin. Heads turned, murmurs rippled row by row. A woman near the front lowered her phone, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I saw you. You were with that Marine. You saved him." Douglas raised a hand, half in protest, half in surrender. "I did what anyone would have," the words stuck in his throat. No, that wasn't true. Not everyone would have done it. And judging by the faces staring at him now, these people knew it too. The murmur grew into something heavier. Not applause, not cheers. Just silence, thick, reverent silence, as men, women, and even children straightened in their seats. Some nodded. Some pressed hands to their chests. A soldier in uniform at the back stood slowly, giving him a firm, solemn salute. Douglas stopped in the middle of the aisle. His grip tightened on the cane, and his heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't felt this kind of gaze in decades. It wasn't the wild, desperate eyes of wounded boys begging him to hold them together. It was gratitude, unspoken, undeniable, and overwhelming. "Sir," the flight attendant said softly, her voice catching. "Your seat is here." He lowered himself carefully, sinking into the narrow cushion. His hands trembled as he buckled the belt. Around him, the silence lingered, the weight of unspoken respect filling every corner of the cabin. For a man who had spent his life haunted by the faces he couldn't save, the living faces around him now felt like something unfamiliar. Something close to peace. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Douglas turned his gaze to the small oval window. The city lights blurred below, and for the first time in a long while, he let his shoulders ease against the seat back. The war would always live inside him. But here, among strangers who had chosen to see him not as a relic of the past, but as a man who still mattered, Douglas felt the faintest shift. A reminder that even in the quiet years, even in the shadows, a life spent saving others could still mean something. The engines droned steadily as the plane climbed into the night sky. Douglas sat stiff in his seat, his cane pressed against his knee, his gaze locked on the faint city lights shrinking below. For a while the silence held. Passengers shifted in their seats. Attendants moved softly through the aisle. And the hum of the jet filled the air like a lullaby. Then, slowly it began. A man across the aisle leaned forward, his voice quiet but sincere. "Sir, I just wanted to thank you. My brother served. He didn't make it back. Seeing what you did today, it means something." Douglas blinked, his throat tightening. He nodded, unable to form words. Another voice followed, this time from behind. "My father was in Vietnam," a woman said, her tone trembling with emotion. "He never talked about it. Not once, but I think, if he had, maybe he would have found some peace. Maybe you could." Douglas's fingers curled around the armrest. For decades, he had carried his silence like armor. He had watched comrades fall, patched wounds with shaking hands, whispered prayers into the ears of dying boys. And yet, he had locked it all away, certain the world didn't want to hear. Now, surrounded by strangers, he felt the weight pressing too hard to bear. He cleared his throat, his voice gravelly and uneven. "It was hell," he said at last. "You never forget the faces. The ones you saved, the ones you couldn't. They follow you. Every night. Even now." The cabin remained utterly still. Passengers leaned closer, not out of curiosity but reverence, giving him the space to continue. Douglas swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the window, though his eyes no longer saw the night outside. "I was just a medic. No weapon. My job was to keep men alive long enough to send them home. Some days I was successful. Others—" His voice broke, and he forced a breath. "Others I wasn't." A child's voice piped up from a few rows ahead. "But you tried, right?" Douglas turned his head, startled. A boy no older than 7 peered at him over the seatback, eyes wide and innocent. "My teacher says trying to help is the bravest thing." The old man's lips trembled. He felt something inside him loosen, something that had been locked away for decades. He gave the boy a small nod. "Yes," he whispered. "I tried." Tears welled in more than one pair of eyes around the cabin. The soldier in uniform who had saluted earlier lowered himself back into his seat, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on his knees. The woman who had spoken of her father covered her mouth, stifling a sob. For the first time in years, Douglas did not feel alone in his memories. He had not absolved himself of the ghosts, but he had finally shared them. And in the faces around him, strangers bound together in a metal tube soaring miles above the earth, he saw understanding. Perhaps even forgiveness. The flight attendant returned, her eyes red but her smile steady. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Rest, sir. We'll take care of things from here." Douglas leaned back, closing his eyes. The hum of the engines no longer felt like a burden pressing on his chest. For the first time since the war, he allowed himself to sleep. Not haunted but held by the quiet respect of those who finally listened. The landing gear thudded against the runway, jolting the cabin as the plane slowed to a steady roll. Passengers stirred, fastening belts and gathering bags, but the silence that had settled earlier remained, fragile and sacred. Douglas stirred awake, blinking against the cabin lights. For a moment, he had forgotten where he was. Then the faces around him came back into focus, gentle, reverent, waiting. The voice of the captain broke through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Before you disembark, I'd like to recognize someone among us tonight. Someone whose actions remind us of the meaning of service and sacrifice. Mr. Douglas Nichols, thank you." The cabin erupted, not with the raucous cheer of a sports arena, but with something deeper. Applause thundered, raw and heartfelt, rolling like a tide that refused to end. Douglas gripped his cane, his chest tightening. He bowed his head, unable to stop the tears pooling in his eyes. As the doors opened, the flight attendants gestured for him to go first. "After you, sir." He stepped into the jet bridge, leaning heavily on his cane. But instead of the quiet emptiness he expected, a wall of light met him. Beyond the glass doors of the terminal, a crowd had gathered, uniforms, reporters, families holding flags. Camera flashes sparked like fireflies in the night. Voices rose in unison, cheers, sobs, chants of gratitude. Douglas froze. He had never asked for this. He had spent decades hiding from the world, carrying ghosts in silence. And yet, here it was, the world refusing to let him slip back into the shadows. The soldier from the flight appeared at his side, straight-backed, eyes shining with pride. He whispered, "They need to see you." "We all do." Douglas drew a long breath. His cane tapped against the floor as he stepped into the terminal. The crowd surged but kept its distance, leaving a path. Flags waved. Children perched on shoulders. Veterans saluted. Reporters lowered microphones. Struck speechless by the weight of the moment, he walked slowly, every step measured. Every sound amplified in his ears, the clicking of his cane, the muffled sobs, the applause that rolled like thunder. For the first time in decades, the voices that followed him were not cries of the dying. but voices of the living, offering thanks. At the edge of the crowd, a young Marine stood with bandages visible beneath his uniform jacket. Corporal Riley. Alive, their eyes met. Riley straightened, pain etched in his face, but his hand rose in a firm salute. Douglas's lips trembled as he raised his trembling hand in return. 2 generations of service bound not by orders, but by sacrifice. As the flashbulbs erupted again, Douglas did not feel like a relic anymore. He felt the weight of history shift, carried not by him alone, but by all who now shared it. For the first time, he stepped forward without fear, walking not into shadows but into light.